Hello, and thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to be looking at maybe something we could understand to be a positive side of the pandemic. One of the things that we learn in this tradition is that all things have the ability to be used by the Lord for good. Even in the darkest of times, our ability to respond to that darkness comes from God and has the ability to transform not only ourselves but the world. I hope you will stay with me and maybe something today will help you see a way to live more vibrantly and more fully in the years to come.
Lord, speak to me that I may speak in living echoes of thy tone, as thou hast sought, so let me seek thy erring children lost and alone. Oh, lead me, Lord, that I may lead the wandering and the wavering feet. Oh, feed me, Lord, that I may feed thy hungering ones with manna sweet. Oh, teach me, Lord, that I may teach the precious things thou dost impart, and wing my words that they may reach the hidden depths of many a heart. Oh, fill me with thy fullness, Lord, until my very heart o'erflow in kindling thought and glowing word, thy love to tell, thy praise to show.
A reading from 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 1 through 14. Now when the king was settled in his house and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies around him, the king said to the prophet Nathan, "See, now I am living in a house of cedar, but the ark of the God stays in a tent." Nathan said to the king, "Go, do all that you have in mind, for the Lord is with you." But that same night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan, "Go and tell my servant David, thus says the Lord, are you the one to build me a house to live in? I have not lived in a house since the day I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day. But I have been moving about in a tent and in a tabernacle wherever I have moved about among all the people of Israel. Did I ever speak a word with anyone of the tribal leaders of Israel, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, 'Why have you not built me a house of cedar?' I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, to be prince over my people Israel. And I have been with you wherever you went. And I have cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them so that they may live in their own place and be disturbed no more. And evildoers shall afflict them no more as formerly, from the time that I appointed judges over my people Israel, and I will give you rest from all your enemies. Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will punish him with a rod such as mortal use, with blows inflicted by human beings. A reading from Mark chapter 6, verses 53 to 56. When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored the boat. When they got out of the boat, people at once recognized him and rushed about that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. A reading from the theological writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, taken from Secrets of Heaven, paragraph number 1495. While we are learning, we progress from facts to rational truth, then to truth known through higher intuition, and finally to heavenly truth. If we go from facts and rational truth directly to heavenly truth, rather than by means of intuitional truth, we do harm to what is heavenly. This is because truth that we arrive at by reasoning on the basis of facts has no link with heavenly truth except through the intuitive truth, which stands in between.
We would be building temples still undone, or crumbling walls their crosses scarcely lift, waiting till love can raise the broken stone, and touch creative bridge the human rift. We would be building, Master, let thy plan reveal the life that God would give to man. Teach us to build upon the solid rock. We set the dream that hardens into deed, ripped with the steel that time and change doth mark, the unfailing purpose of our noblest creed. Teach us to build, O Master, lend us sight, to see the towers gleaming in the light. Oh, keep us building, Master, may our hands ne'er falter when the dream is in our hearts, when to our ears there come divine commands, and all the pride of sinful will departs. We build with thee, O grant enduring worth, until the heavenly kingdom comes on earth.
The pandemic has caused countless deaths, hundreds of thousands of people in our country and throughout the world. It's just more than we can possibly know. It has caused people to lose jobs, to lose homes. There's been so much devastation that it almost feels like an injustice to say that there could be something positive that we could get from it. What I would argue is that everything that happens on the earth is allowed to happen because good can come from it. That does not make it inherently good in and of itself, but our ability to respond to it. When we respond with the love that the Lord has given us, our ability to respond with that love gives us the ability to do good from even the darkest of things. So my question is, as many people are emerging from their walls during this pandemic, and a pandemic that is by no means over, but some people have reduced risk. But as they leave their homes, or maybe are forced to stay in their homes, what things in their life have transformed? You know, before the pandemic, people were very busy and we ran about doing a whole bunch of things from, movies to shopping in malls, all sorts of activities and things. And the pandemic hit and it all stopped. People were thrust into a position of having to question what is really important in their lives. And some people argue that the ability to even question what's important is is something of privilege, but I don't believe that's 100% true. I believe that no matter what place a person has, the pandemic was a moment where things slowed and things stopped. And now that things are reopening, we have an opportunity to ask a question about our lives. Are we doing what really matters? Are we doing what's really important for our lives? We've been through a year where the things that maybe a lot of us thought were important just really weren't. We survived without doing all of the stuff that keeps us busy. In fact, so often in our lives, and maybe not a person's life, but maybe the life of an institution, we can rate success by being busy. In fact, I would argue that sometimes maybe we forget what it's like to be alone. In fact, maybe being alone even makes us sad, and we struggle with it. What I find interesting is throughout all of the stories in the Gospels that we read today, throughout all the stories, before and after this particular story, we keep hearing about the disciples needing to stop and rest, to pause, to have time to eat, for Jesus to go off and pray, for the disciples to go off and pray. And my question is, how are we working that stop or that pause into our lives? The pandemic did it for us, by all means. We certainly got to stop there and we could contemplate things. And maybe we were even left ill-equipped for what it meant to go into a place of isolation. When is it that you pause? When is it that you reflect? And this whole thing, by the way, is about the building of the Lord's temple. David, by the way, was not allowed to build the Lord's temple. It was something that only his son could do. David was too busy. David was trying to stabilize the country, and the Lord did not expect him to do it, but he said, your offspring should. So certainly there's a time in our lives where we have to do what is necessary. But we should never lose sight of the fact that there are things that are important. The Lord is with us. We can drag the Lord around from here to there to here to there. We can have a makeshift tabernacle. We can have a tent. We can do all sorts of things. But when do we pause and stop and say, God is number one? God is actually what is important. All of the other things that keep me busy are really not as important because God is the foundation of all of them. We're all growing. We're all maturing. We're all learning lessons that stretch all the way from our youth until our adulthood. There's no one point at which we can say, we're done. We are always building temples. Are we pausing to look to God, to ask for plans, for direction? What are we doing to remind ourselves that our Holy Land, our body, our lives, our loves and ideas, and all the things that make us who we are not strictly ours, but they are tools for God to use? When do we pause and contemplate that? So often we can forget that because people come at us from every direction hoping to change things, hoping to get things accomplished. We live in a time now where people cease to have weekends because we have smartphones. We can now work wherever we are. In talking with a friend of mine recently, I asked him about the paternity leave he was about to go on. And I asked him, well, who should people call when you're not around? He said, oh, don't worry about it. Go ahead and call me. I always have my phone with me, and I don't want to let my email get out of hand. When do we pause? When do we stop? When do we contemplate what's really important? When do we say it doesn't matter how many activities we have, how many widgets we have, but when do we start asking the question of what is the most important quality we have? What are the reasons behind what we do, what we are doing? If one's in a church, the reason for a church to be there is to glorify and magnify God's name and to spread the word to the people who are around them and to help people become better people. If your job is in government, it's not simply to legislate and pass laws, it's to protect those who don't have a voice. It is to create a stable economic environment, not because one wants to get rich, but because you're trying to keep your people safe. If you're in law enforcement, it's the reason is not how many tickets do you get out to make quota, it's are you keeping the road safe? Are you protecting the most vulnerable of our society? Are you making sure that those people who are innocent are not charged unduly or put in situations of risk and violence? Every job, even if you're a store clerk, you have a higher calling than simply the metrics. You have the why. What is the core purpose? What I hope is in the time of pandemic, people have time to ask the question, what's my core purpose? And if you don't have time during the pandemic, now that we're coming out of it, hopefully we have time now to stop and contemplate and ask the question of not what are we going to do, but why? Why are we going to do it? From a Christian perspective, why are we going to do it must involve how am I sharing the Lord's love through whatever I do? Whether it is a vocation, whether it is helping a neighbor, whether it is going grocery shopping, we always are asking the question of how do I love the person who is next to me? We are always building on that foundational core principle of discipleship, that what we have and what we do belongs to the Lord and not to us. What does it mean to live into that future? That is a lesson that we can respond to chaos and pandemic with. So as we emerge, as we shift what we are doing, as we ask ourselves, what do I do today? Are we asking ourselves that question of what is our foundational principle to live by? What is our statement of faith? And are we trying to find a way to live that statement of faith in everything that we do? Amen.